Welcome back to our next step in our journey through Proverbs. We're in chapter 3, working on verses 1 through 8. We're going to be particularly looking into 3 through 8 today. And just a reminder, this is not a series that's about finding answers. It's a series about learning a process and learning to encounter God through his scriptures by coming to them on relational terms. If we want to have a relationship with God, if we want to know him the way he desires to be known, then we have to read the Bible, one of the ways he's given us to know him, relationally. And so remember, that's always what we're trying to do here. So even if you've missed some videos and even if you're coming in here in the middle of things, it's all right. It's about the process and encountering God through his word. So let's go ahead and get started doing that today. Let's go ahead and read this section again. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Now, reading this, I do think I have to start Oh my. I do think I have to start in verse 2 again. I thought that we were just going to have the one video on verses 1 through 2, but it occurs to me that I may not have handled that very well in the last video. Now, I'm not going to say necessarily that everything we said doesn't have any relevance, but as I'm looking at, and this is why verses can sometimes be tricky, right? Because look at it for a second with me like this. And, some of you probably already caught that. But if you look at it like this, my son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace, they will add to you. What I'm saying is that there was another way to take that. I'm not, and again, remember, this is a process, and it's not always about being right, but something that we would need to consider that I certainly didn't consider in the last video is that I don't know why it's doing this. Sorry. Something we would have to consider is that length of days and years of life are in addition to the peace that will be added. So we talked about how peace would be added and why, but we talked about the length of days and years of life as more of a qualifier of how this process is taking place instead of the fact that keeping the teaching, or remembering the teaching and keeping the commandments might then add length of days and years of life and peace to you, right? So this could be something that is added. So this is a great question. Is it something that's added, or is it more like a qualifier like we talked about? Now, I'm sure Hebrew could clear this up real quick, but I don't know Hebrew, and I don't have the Hebrew text right here. So what do we do in a situation like this as people who are just trying to figure out what this is going to mean for me and for my life, and trying to see what God is saying and dig deeper into the treasure of his word? Well, again, the point is not necessarily to find the right answer. though there may be one in this case, but I'm not sure. But if we could consider, all right, well, what if it is something that is added? We've talked about it as a qualifier. Well, what if it is something that is added? Why would the remembering and the keeping add length of days and years of life? Right? Time is our most finite, is our most limited resource. How can keeping the teaching, keeping the commandments add time to our lives? Because that would be huge. That would be an absolute game changer for our lives. Well, this could work in two senses, right? An ultimate sense, or eternal sense, but also a practical sense. And that's not really a good, I'm not really distinguishing those. Eternality is very practical. But I guess I could use the word a more present sense. So in the ultimate sense, a wise life is oriented fundamentally towards eternity. Because eternity is the highest goal. It's the greatest horizon. And so wisdom is pursuing the kind of life that will continue on into eternity, because it is the wise, it is the upright, it is the just and the trustworthy who will inhabit the land and remain there, as we talked about in chapter 2. So it might add more time in a sense, because you're going to be living eternity in life rather than eternity in death and destruction and loss, the way it's talked about for the evil man and the forbidden woman in chapter 2, which if you haven't seen that section of chapter 2, be sure to go back and watch those videos, because it's very, very interesting, all that's going on there, and will help explain how I'm parsing this out. Yet there's also a present sense of this, in which you could imagine that when we think about the different kinds of paths, and here I'll draw them for you, right? We have that straight, difficult, light path of the just, right? And this is girded by God. This is the path of the wise, etc. And the twisting, fumbling, downhill, dark path of the evil, of what is forbidden and perverse. Okay? Well, let's think about this practically. Which path? Which path will produce a longer life? You know, without the claim of the proverb, we could ask this question and come to an answer, right? Which path is more likely to produce a longer life? Well, my first instinct is actually not to start spiritually, but to actually think about this physically, right? Which one is more likely to produce a healthier person? This path is, in a physical sense, easier. It's downward. Even if both paths were equally light, it requires less effort to go down this path. Well, is your body going to become strong and healthy doing the easier downward thing that requires less effort? Of course that's not how you get healthy, right? That's why we all tend not to work out, or at least most of us, because it is not easy and downward and less effort. It is difficult. It's upward. It's more effort. More effort. It's painful. And yet, it produces health. The thing that requires more effort, that has an upward trajectory, that is more difficult, that's the thing that produces health. The upward, challenging path. This is the path not just of the just, but of the healthy. In a physical sense, not even a spiritual sense, in a physical sense. And this is the path of, well, we can just say the unhealthy, right? The downward path is not exercise. The upward path is, right? The upward path is training. The downward path is just lollygagging around. And so at the most basic level, why would the teachings and the commandments add length of days and years of life? Because the commandments and the teachings are training you, and they're setting you on a path to train you, to build you up into a healthy person. And now we can translate that spiritually, because this is fundamentally a training of your heart. Of your heart, of your soul, of your character. It's got a trajectory, it's got a plan, it's got a purpose, and you have tools to help you out along that way, to overcome the obstacles, to climb the hills. And you have the power of God, of the Spirit, meeting you in that. But you don't need any of that to go down the path of evil and the forbidden path. That path is incredibly easy. In fact, that path is so easy that you will find yourself slipping down it through no real effort of your own if you even step a foot onto it. And so when we look at the ultimate eternal sense, right, these two kinds of paths have different ends. Right? Two paths, two ends. But the paths also, they don't just have ends. These paths produce different kinds of people. And the path of the just produces the kind of person who will have greater length of days, will have more years of life. They will be better off. They will have more. And this is what's crazy, right? They will have more. The just will have more of the thing which runs out the fastest and is the most valuable: our time. So I wasn't expecting to go down this road, but it was quite exciting. I mean, it just shocked me right as I began reading this passage in verse 2 that it just read completely differently. I mean, that can happen. Don't be afraid of that. Don't look back and think, oh, well, I wasted my time with this other idea. No. These can coalesce. They can go together. They're not mutually exclusive. They're both oriented towards building up love of God and love of neighbor, and they don't condemn one another, and they don't conflict with the doctrines of the faith. Then it's probably a useful interpretation, and one that can help you, and if nothing else, help to open doors. If I hadn't gone through the process of treating the for length of days and years of life as a qualifier, I might have never even seen that it's actually what is being added. And someone else might have seen that right off the bat, and they might have been thinking, why the heck is this guy talking about a qualifier? It's being added, right? And that's great. We come with different perspectives, but the fact that you can come back to the same verse and just be blown away by a completely different reading that is equally and perhaps more beautiful is part of the richness of the adventure of encountering God through His Word. So I hope this has been an instructive example. It has certainly been a very good reminder for me as I go through the Proverbs with you to stay on the lookout, to not get stuck in one idea and say, oh, well, this is the right one. I got it this time. There's always more. There's always more layers. There's always something deeper. There's always something I didn't understand. Because God is giving us that understanding in His time and at His pace. And sometimes it's very, very difficult, but it is always a gift. So thank you for joining me on what is sort of a tangent, but not really. It's just a deeper step, unveiling another layer. And just to briefly review, right, we considered that perhaps the time and the days and the years is something that's added. And we had to ask ourselves, well, why would years be added on this basis of not forgetting the teaching and keeping the commandments? Well, we chose two senses, that there's an ultimate sense that the kinds of paths we take have different ends, and one is eternal life and one is eternal suffering, and eternal life is obviously the superior path, and so there's more time in real life and not in endless death in an eternal sense. But in a present sense, we had to think about, well, what kind of person do these paths produce, right? They don't just have different ends, and they do have different ends, but they produce different kinds of people. Because the path of the just, the path of the wise, is a healthy path. It's a path of training the heart, of training the soul, of training the character, and that produces a stronger heart, which can last for more time, right? And the just, therefore, will have more of the thing which runs out the fastest. They will have more time because they are training to endure longer. And that's a word I need to add. They are training, the training of your heart and your soul, for what? For the sake of endurance. And ultimately endurance unto eternity. Thank you for joining me. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.